The decision-making of the FIA has been under a lot of scrutiny yet again, and with all the right reasons. During the Belgian Grand Prix, we witnessed some horrendous decisions that made champions like Verstappen and Hamilton completely angry. However, what is next for the FIA? And more importantly, where do we stand with the infamous rain making everything so complicated for the race directors? Once upon a time, we were very thrilled to see some racing in Formula One under the rain. Who wouldn't be? A mixed-up grid, cars lining up where they shouldn't be, and small mistakes costing the drivers a lot in the pecking order. Be that as it may, the sport has started to slowly but surely shift towards more safety. And it seems like they've crossed the line as to how much safe is too much safe. During the Belgian Grand Prix, it was always known that we were going to have a rainy Sunday, hence the modifications on the majority of the cars during the weekend. Verstappen was loaded with a high downforce wing, meaning that he would have lost tons of top speed just to keep up in the middle and fast speed corners. Perfect for the rainy conditions. The only thing that didn't go according to plan was the fact that the FIA waited for the rain to stop completely and the track to dry before they continued racing. We were stripped away from an amazing spectacle that could have brought some very good racing and overtaking. However, if you were to ask Verstappen and Hamilton, the decision of the FIA was utterly wrong. Elaborating further on this, the four-time world champion said, "Well, the start procedure being suspended is a bit silly. I mean, you just should run a few laps. Jesus, they are way too cautious. Now, the heavy rain is coming, and then it's going to be a 3-hour delay. They took a very cautious approach, which we spoke about after Silverstone, to be a little bit more cautious. But for me, this was then the other extreme. It just ruined a nice classic wet race as well. We either still try to push for a proper wet race, or we say, you know what, let's just stop racing in the wet and wait for it to be dry. But that's not what you want, right? We can still have some really cool wet racing like we showed at Silverstone. It's not something that we can't agree on. The drivers are literally made for conditions like this. I'm not saying the race shouldn't have been red flagged. We've seen the amount of standing water on the track and the torrential rain. Nobody in their right minds would have suggested racing under those conditions, especially not after losing 2 young lives in 2019 and 2023 under similar circumstances. However, once the track started to dry up, there was an opportunity for the drivers to go behind the safety car, create a dry racing line, and just go from there. Instead, the FIA waited for the rain to completely stop, for the track to be dry enough for the intermediate tires to work, and then sent the drivers out there. With no rain expected, it was obvious that we were going to see slick tires being mounted soon after. And that effectively didn't help anybody who thought that they were going to be racing in the rain. But what can be done here? The FIA is under a lot of scrutiny for their actions when the wet conditions are becoming a big factor. And I think they have weighed a little bit more towards the safety rather than the spectacle. And this is where we needed to talk about the wider perspective. What about the wet tires? Formula One literally has a set of tires that are meant to be used in conditions that have presented themselves in Spa. So why not use them at all? Why not allow the teams to try and have a better grip with these tires and avoid accidents? The problem lies with the ability of these tires to clear water during the onset testing. They produced more spray because of the amount of water they displaced, which is around 60 L per second. So, they are going to dry the track quicker, but they're also going to make the visibility even harder, which was the primary issue as to why the track was delayed in the first place. Not to mention that the drivers would be much slower with them, which in Spa under the rain, I don't think would have made that big of a difference. The drivers with the best skills would have been able to come across and prove what they're made of. I understand it's fair towards the drivers and the respect that they have for their lives. But there comes a certain point where you have to ask yourself, is this really worth it? Is the FIA really capable of organizing a race under wet conditions? From this point of view, I don't think so. What I think is that we're going to see races only when the rain is not that big of a deal, or more precisely, when it's going to be intermediate and not enable the drivers to literally drift their cars all over the track. And that's where the joy of the sport is lost, because even with the race restart, Hamilton was found to be very skeptical as to why we had a rolling instead of a standing start procedure. Elaborating further on this, the 7-time world champion said, definitely could have done a standing start, especially at the end there. It was almost a dry line. It was hot in the spray, so definitely could have done it. But it seems like not everybody was on the same side as Verstappen and Hamilton, starting with Leclerc. The Monégasque driver said that he understands why the race management had to wait until 4:20 p.m. to officially start the race, because in this sport everything needs to be perfect. I kind of disagree with that, because it takes away the excitement factor. But I'll leave Charles entitled to his own opinion, which I'm sure is shared by many F1 experts around the world. He is a proven race winner, not me. Elaborating further on this, Leclerc said, I think it's always fine-tuning on a track like this with what happened historically. I think you cannot forget about it. For that reason, I'd rather be safe than too early. It's a constant discussion and will probably feed back to the people that made this decision, and maybe it was a little bit on the late side, but I wouldn't have changed anything. The same side was taken